Ethan, 35 years old, has always walked his own path, different from the rest of his family. He didn't follow the family's legacy and instead found success with his small organic farm. Although he's done well in his career, Ethan has always felt like the black sheep of the family, especially compared to his younger brother, Jack, who took over the family tech company. Jack constantly exudes a sense of superiority, thinking he is the only one deserving of success. One Friday, Ethan decides to invite the whole family to dinner at an upscale restaurant to celebrate Jack closing a big deal. The dinner includes his mother, Anne, along with Jack and his wife, Amelia. Jack's daughter, Lily, is the only one Ethan feels a real connection with. At this gathering, Ethan hopes to extend his kindness and have a peaceful evening, but things don't go as planned. As the night unfolds, Ethan's quiet generosity and different approach to life are met with mockery from the people closest to him, especially Jack, who never misses an opportunity to belittle his older brother. The evening started off like any other family gathering, Jack dominating the conversation, talking endlessly about his latest business deal. Amelia, his wife, smiled and nodded in agreement, hanging on to every word, as if Jack were sharing profound wisdom with the world. Ethan had long learned to tune out his brother's brags, redirecting his attention instead to his niece, Lily. She was only 8 years old but had a sharp mind and an innocence that made her the only truly genuine person in the family, aside from Ethan. Ethan listened attentively as Lily spoke excitedly about her school project on the environment and her most recent art project, which she had poured her heart into. He smiled, glad to have a break from the usual tension that surrounded Jack's grandstanding. However, as the food arrived, something outside caught Ethan's eye. He noticed an elderly man sitting on the bench just outside the restaurant, bundled in layers with a cart that looked like it contained everything he owned. The man was trying his best to stay warm, yet it was clear he was struggling in the evening chill. Ethan had always been in a position where he could help others. In fact, it was something he did regularly. Whenever he saw someone in need, he tried to do something about it. Without drawing attention to himself, he quietly leaned over to the server and ordered an additional meal. He asked for the soup of the day and a sandwich, requesting that it be packed to go. Ethan had no intention of telling anyone. This was simply the way he was. But Jack, ever the attention seeker, caught the exchange. "Oh, playing the savior again, little brother." Jack smirked, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, mocking Ethan's quiet act of kindness. Ethan ignored the comment and continued talking to Lily, trying to focus on her enthusiasm about school. But Jack couldn't let it slide. "You know," Jack continued, speaking in that mocking tone of his, "it's funny how you're always trying to prove you're better than everyone else with your little charity acts. Is it because you're still trying to erase the fact that Dad had to bail you out of your failed ventures when we were kids?" Ethan didn't respond. He knew Jack's cruel words were nothing new, but they still stung. Lily, who had been happily chatting away, went silent, her eyes darting between the adults as she noticed the shift in the atmosphere. Ethan could feel her gaze, but he didn't let it break his focus. Instead, he continued talking to Lily about her latest science project. The tension at the table, however, was palpable. The server returned with the packed meal, and Ethan excused himself from the table to step outside. As he approached the elderly man, he overheard Jack's voice ringing out through the open window of the restaurant. "Even homeless people have more worth than you." Jack laughed loudly, the words echoing across the street. "At least they're honest about who they are. You're just pretending that you're something you're not." The elderly man, who had just thanked Ethan for the meal, looked up at him with gratitude in his eyes. Ethan could hear the laughter of his family from inside, and it felt like it was drilling into his skull. His mother's nervous chuckles, Amelia's high-pitched laugh, and Jack's booming voice all blended together in a harsh symphony of mockery. But only Lily remained silent. She pressed her face against the window, her wide eyes full of concern as she watched her family laugh at her uncle. Ethan walked back inside, his head held high, but his heart heavy. He sat back down, finishing his meal in silence. Jack continued his tirade, throwing in jabs about Ethan's charity work, trying to paint him as a fraud, a man who needed to buy his own personality. Every cruel comment was met with laughter from the table. As the meal came to a close, Ethan could see the lack of sincerity in everyone's reactions. Amelia was too busy scrolling through her phone to even acknowledge him. His mother avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable. And Jack was still in the middle of one of his long-winded stories about his so-called business acumen, oblivious to how his words had affected Ethan. When the check came, Ethan quietly pulled out his card and paid the bill. Jack was too engrossed in his tale to notice Ethan standing up. Without a word, Ethan placed his card on the table, then turned to his family. "Thanks for dinner," he said, his voice steady. "I need to go." As he walked out, he could hear Jack's eye roll and mockery, probably launching into another commentary about his dramatic exits. But Ethan didn't care. What they didn't know was that this night had changed something in him. It was time to confront the truth. The following days were filled with a sense of unease for Ethan. As he tried to process the events of that evening, he couldn't shake off the sting of Jack's cruel remarks. He knew he had always been different from his family, but the sharpness of Jack's words had cut deeper than he expected. Jack's mocking laughter echoed in his mind as he spent the weekend thinking about how he could prove himself, not to his family, but to himself. He realized it was time to stop pretending everything was fine and investigate what Jack had been doing with the family business. Ethan had always known that Jack was self-absorbed and arrogant, but the level of corruption he was now beginning to uncover was something he never anticipated. Ethan had kept his distance from the family business, choosing to follow his own path. But now, with everything Jack had said about Ethan's failures, Ethan was determined to find out what his younger brother had really been doing behind the scenes. One morning, Ethan received a call from Eliza, an old friend of his late father who had worked with the family business for years. Eliza, a diligent and trustworthy woman, had been keeping track of the company's financials after Ethan's father passed away. She sounded cautious but urgent when she asked to meet. Ethan agreed, and when they sat down, Eliza revealed the shocking truth. Over the past several years, she had noticed small discrepancies in the company's financial reports. At first they were minor, easily brushed off. But they had grown steadily larger, and Eliza feared that something far more sinister was at play. With Eliza's help, Ethan started digging through the company's financial records. The pattern quickly became clear. Jack had been siphoning large sums of money from the family business. What started as small amounts, transferred to offshore accounts, had escalated into millions. These were funds that should have been used for the company's expansion, payroll, and employee benefits. But Jack had used them to fund his personal luxuries, vacation homes, expensive cars, private jets, and even to cover up his gambling debts. The more Ethan uncovered, the angrier he became. He had always supported the family business, believing it was part of his legacy. But now he realized that Jack had been taking advantage of him and their father's hard work. The worst part was that some of the money Jack had funneled out of the company had come from Ethan's own investments, money he had lent to help expand the business, believing it was for the greater good. Jack had deceived him at every turn, presenting himself as the company's savior, while secretly robbing it blind. Ethan knew he couldn't ignore this anymore. He had been blind to the truth for far too long, thinking his brother was just a little too self-absorbed, a little too proud. But this was theft, and it had to be exposed. Ethan began gathering evidence, documenting every fraudulent transaction he could find, including fake consulting fees, inflated contracts, and shell companies Jack had set up to hide his financial crimes. He was meticulous, not missing a single detail. His mind raced with thoughts of how to confront Jack. Should he confront him privately first, or should he go straight to the authorities? Ethan knew he couldn't wait much longer. The company and its employees deserved better. As Ethan continued his investigation, he couldn't help but reflect on the conversation they had at dinner. Jack had laughed, mocking him, calling him a failure. But it was Jack who had failed: the business, the family, and his own integrity. It was time for Ethan to step up. Ethan realized that in order to right the wrongs Jack had committed, he had to take charge. The next move was clear. He would have to expose Jack's corruption to the family, the board, and the authorities. But he would need to be careful, planning his next steps strategically. Jack had too many allies, and Ethan couldn't risk losing everything. The more Ethan thought about how to confront Jack, the more determined he became. The old Ethan, the one who had always tried to keep the peace and avoid confrontation, was gone. He had spent too many years walking on eggshells around his family, trying to appease Jack and keep the peace. But now, after everything he had uncovered, Ethan realized that it wasn't just about family anymore. It was about doing what was right. He had always assumed that, deep down, Jack wanted what was best for the business, even if he was arrogant and selfish. But now Ethan understood that Jack's primary motivation wasn't the business. It was greed. Jack had exploited every opportunity, turning the legacy their father had worked so hard to build into his personal piggy bank. Ethan felt betrayed, not just by Jack, but by the way his mother and the rest of the family had blindly supported Jack's lies for so long. As the days passed, Ethan prepared for the upcoming board meeting with meticulous care. He spent hours reviewing the documents Eliza had helped him gather, double-checking the evidence. There was no room for error. This was the moment he would have to face his brother and his family, exposing Jack for who he truly was. He couldn't go into that meeting unprepared or without full knowledge of the damage Jack had caused. Ethan knew it was going to be difficult, but he had one thing Jack didn't: the truth. The truth was undeniable, and no amount of Jack's manipulation or charm could mask it. He was ready to expose Jack's corruption to everyone: the board, their mother, and anyone else who needed to know. The day of the meeting arrived, and Ethan walked into the boardroom with a newfound sense of purpose. He had spent the past week preparing everything. He was no longer the man who had quietly stepped aside and let Jack take the spotlight. Today, he was ready to take control. Ethan knew that this wasn't just a family issue. It was a business issue. The future of the company, its employees, and its reputation were on the line. As the board members started filing into the room, Ethan kept his composure, even as he saw Jack strut in, full of his usual smugness. Jack flashed a grin when he saw Ethan. Well, little brother finally decided to join the family business," he said with mock enthusiasm. Ethan didn't respond. He simply placed 3 folders on the table in front of the board members, each one containing evidence of Jack's financial crimes. Jack, oblivious to the storm brewing, began speaking about the company's projected growth and future expansion plans. He continued for several minutes, painting a picture of success that Ethan knew was nothing but a facade. When Jack finally paused, Ethan stood up and cleared his throat. "Before we discuss any further expansion plans," Ethan said calmly, "I think it's time we review these financial transactions from the past few years." The room grew silent as Ethan slid the first folder across the table. Jack's confident smile faltered slightly. The board members began flipping through the pages, one by one, as they took in the evidence of Jack's systematic theft: inflated invoices, fake consulting fees, and millions siphoned into shell companies. Jack's face turned pale, but he quickly recovered, his left eye twitching, betraying his nerves. "What is this?" one of the board members asked, clearly confused. Ethan's voice was steady as he looked at Jack, his eyes piercing through the calm facade. "It's about accountability," Ethan replied. "Jack, would you like to explain the consulting fees to Maxwell Holdings, or should I?" The mention of Maxwell Holdings, one of Jack's first shell companies, sent a ripple through the room. Ethan could see Jack's confidence cracking, and it gave him a sense of satisfaction he had never known before. This wasn't just about Jack's greed anymore. It was about holding him accountable for all the lives he had affected, the employees who had trusted the company, the customers who believed in its integrity. As the board continued to examine the evidence, Ethan felt a surge of pride. He wasn't just fighting for his own reputation anymore. He was fighting for the people who had been wronged, for the employees who had worked hard but never reaped the rewards of their efforts. And most of all, he was fighting for the legacy of his father, one that Jack had been systematically destroying. The boardroom was silent as the last page of the folder was turned. Ethan could see the shock and disbelief in the eyes of the board members. For years they had trusted Jack to steer the family business, believing his confidence and bravado were signs of leadership. But now they saw the truth laid out in front of them. Jack had systematically embezzled millions, funneling money into offshore accounts, inflating contracts, and siphoning funds that should have gone to the employees. Jack, who had once been the shining star of the company, was now cornered. His bravado was gone, replaced with nervous sweats and twitching eyes. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment, the weight of everything that had been building up over the years. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. Jack had mocked him for years, calling him a failure, while he himself had been stealing from the company and its employees. Now, it was time for Ethan to rewrite the story. As the tension grew, Ethan slid the second folder across the table. "You see, this isn't just about some small discrepancies," Ethan continued, his voice steady. "This is about the pension fund you've been draining, Jack. Employees who have worked their whole lives for this company deserve better than to be robbed of their futures." The board members shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at each other in disbelief. Jack's face, once full of confidence, was now pale and trembling. He tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat. "This is ridiculous," he stammered, trying to regain control. "You don't understand. The market was volatile. I needed the money to cover some shortfalls." Ethan cut him off. "Shortfalls? Is that why you bought a yacht last month, Jack? To cover shortfalls?" He pulled out the bank statements that revealed Jack's extravagant purchases. "Tell me, Jack, when exactly did the company start financing your personal lifestyle?" As the evidence piled up, the reality of the situation began to sink in for everyone in the room. Amelia, who had been silently sitting by Jack's side, suddenly looked horrified. She had always turned a blind eye to Jack's questionable behavior, but now she was faced with the undeniable truth. "What yacht?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Jack hadn't told her about his expensive purchases or his offshore accounts. She had been living in a false reality, one where everything seemed perfect, but in truth, her husband had been embezzling money and leading a double life. The room was in an uproar. Jack tried to deflect, pinning blame on Eliza, the longtime family associate who had been documenting everything for Ethan. But Eliza's records were airtight. She'd been watching Jack for months, knowing something was off. And now, with Ethan's help, she had gathered all the evidence necessary to bring him down. "I did what I had to do," Ethan said, his voice calm, but filled with the quiet fury of years of being belittled and ignored. "You've been stealing from this company for years, Jack. You've been stealing from the people who worked for this company, from the employees who believed in you. And now, It's time to face the consequences, Jack snapped. Dad would have understood. He spat, his voice shaky with rage. He knew business isn't about playing nice. It's about surviving. Ethan's eyes narrowed. No, Jack, he said firmly. Dad fired his own brother for taking a single unauthorized commission. He would have been ashamed of you. The mention of their father hit Jack harder than anything. The weight of their father's legacy, the very thing he had used to justify his actions, now seemed like a reminder of his ultimate failure. Jack was the one who had betrayed that legacy, and Ethan was the one who would restore it. With the final piece of the puzzle revealed, Ethan knew that the power was in his hands. He wasn't just taking back control of the company. He was also changing the future for the employees who had been left in the dust by Jack's greed. Ethan's next move would be to restructure the company, making it an employee-owned corporation. This wasn't about revenge. It was about creating a fair system, one where every person who contributed to the success of the company would have a share in its future. As the board voted to remove Jack as a majority shareholder, Ethan felt a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just a victory for him. It was a victory for the company and the people who had been overlooked for too long. Ethan wasn't done yet, though. He still had one more thing to do. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out the third folder. It was time to show the final piece of the puzzle. The police reports that would ensure Jack faced justice for his actions. As the board members unanimously voted to remove Jack as the majority shareholder, Ethan felt a quiet sense of triumph. The battle wasn't over yet, but this was a pivotal moment, a turning point not just for the company, but for his family. For years, Ethan had been the subject of ridicule and mockery. He was the failed son who walked away from the family business. He was the one who tried to be good, who believed in kindness, even when it wasn't popular. But now, Ethan realized that kindness alone wasn't enough. Sometimes doing what was right meant standing up to the people you loved, especially when they were wrong. For Ethan, this wasn't just about Jack's greed. It was about reclaiming his own sense of self-worth. He had spent too many years trying to prove to his family that he was worth something, but now he was doing it for himself. He wasn't fighting for their approval anymore. He was fighting for the values he believed in: integrity, fairness, and loyalty to the people who had truly earned their place. After the meeting ended, Ethan spent the next few days speaking with the board, working out the details of the company's new structure. He would be taking control, but not in the way Jack had always wanted him to. Ethan believed that real leadership wasn't about hoarding power. It was about empowering others, about creating opportunities for everyone involved. And that's exactly what he planned to do. Ethan's vision for the company was simple: employee ownership. He wanted every long-term employee to have equity in the company, allowing them to benefit directly from the company's growth and success. This would not only create a more motivated and loyal workforce, but it would also restore the integrity of the business that Jack had so carelessly destroyed. While working on the restructuring, Ethan also focused on the personal side of things. The most important part of all of this was Lily, Jack's daughter. Ethan wasn't going to let the mistakes of her father define her future. He had already set up a trust fund for her, one that would cover her education from grade school all the way through college. No matter what happened with her father, Lily would be given the chance to succeed, to live a life of opportunity without the shadow of Jack's actions looming over her. Ethan also took steps to right the wrongs Jack had done to others. The elderly man from the restaurant, the one who had unknowingly sparked this entire chain of events, turned out to be far more important than Ethan had initially realized. The man, whose name was William, had once been a partner in the family business, back in the days when Ethan's father was still alive. But Jack had forced him out under false pretenses, pushing him into early retirement. Ethan was determined to make sure William's legacy was restored. He reinstated his pension, with back pay, and even invited him back to the company as a consultant. But the most important step was giving William a seat on the board. He would be part of the decision-making process now, bringing back the values of integrity and fairness that had been missing for so long. Ethan also took a moment to reflect on how far he had come. He wasn't the man he used to be, the one who quietly accepted Jack's insults and mockery. Now he was someone who had faced the truth, who had taken control of his own destiny, and made sure that those who had been wronged were given a fair shot. His character had grown in ways he never thought possible. He had learned that standing up for what's right wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. The power to change things wasn't just about financial success. It was about the impact you had on the lives of others, the way you treated people, and the legacy you left behind. And as for Jack, Ethan knew that his brother's journey was far from over. The police investigation was still in progress, and the full extent of Jack's crimes would soon come to light. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that justice would be served. But he also knew that this was more than just about revenge. It was about showing the world what true worth really meant. The final pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place. Jack's once perfect world was unraveling, and Ethan was watching it all happen. It wasn't out of malice, but out of a deep need for justice, for truth, and for the company that had been built on hard work, honesty, and integrity. While Ethan felt a sense of satisfaction in seeing Jack's empire crumble, he didn't take any joy in it. What mattered more to him was how things were shaping up for the future. The restructuring of the company was almost complete, and with it came a profound sense of accomplishment for Ethan. His vision had been realized. Long-term employees now owned a share of the company. They weren't just workers anymore. They were stakeholders in the business, partners in its future. This was the kind of leadership Ethan had always believed in, empowering others, creating opportunities for those who had worked hard, and making sure everyone had a voice. For Ethan, this was the real success. As he walked into the newly restructured boardroom, Ethan felt a surge of pride. He looked around the room at the faces of the employees who had been with the company for years, people who had stayed loyal even when the leadership had failed them. Now, they were part of the company's future, with equity that would allow them to benefit from the company's growth. It was a victory, but it wasn't just his. It was theirs, too. Ethan had made sure that the company's new direction would not only be profitable, but would also prioritize the well-being of the people who made it possible. The employees were now shareholders, invested in the company's success in a way that had never been done before. Ethan wasn't just securing the company's future. He was giving the people who had built it the chance to thrive. But even more satisfying for Ethan was the impact he had on his niece, Lily. After all the chaos of her father's actions, Lily needed stability, and Ethan was determined to provide that. He had made sure she would be free from the burden of her father's mistakes, setting up a trust fund for her education that couldn't be touched by anyone. Certainly not Jack. She would grow up with the opportunities that Jack had denied her, free from the shadow of his greed. Ethan couldn't help but smile as he thought about how Lily had flourished. He had taken her to visit the art school where she had earned first place in her latest competition. It was a proud moment for him, knowing that he had helped her along her journey. As he looked at her, Ethan realized that his decisions, his actions, had all been worth it. He wasn't just protecting the company. He was protecting the future, ensuring that the next generation would have a better chance, one untainted by Jack's corruption. The final piece of the puzzle was William, the elderly man who had been the catalyst for Ethan's transformation. William's reinstatement to the company as a consultant and board member had been one of the most satisfying decisions. Not only had Ethan restored the pension funds that Jack had drained, but he had also ensured that someone who truly understood the values of the company would have a say in its future. William's wisdom, his integrity, was a reminder of the company's roots, and now his voice would guide it back on track. As for Jack, Ethan couldn't help but think about the ultimate irony. Jack had lost everything: his wealth, his position, his family. His name had become synonymous with corruption and greed. And even though Ethan's actions had led to Jack's downfall, it was clear to him now that Jack had always been blind to what truly mattered. Ethan had learned that true worth was never about wealth or status. It was about character, about doing what's right, and about protecting those who mattered most. Jack would never understand that, but Ethan didn't need him to. Karma had a way of catching up, and as Ethan stood in the boardroom, surrounded by the people he had fought for, he realized that true success wasn't measured by the downfall of others. It was about lifting others up. It was about making the world better than it was before you found it. The story of Ethan and Jack teaches us a profound lesson about integrity, accountability, and the power of standing up for what is right. Ethan's journey from the black sheep of the family to the one who brings justice to light shows that true worth isn't measured by wealth or power, but by character and the decisions we make. When faced with betrayal and mockery, Ethan chose the path of honesty and righteousness, exposing his brother's greed while ensuring that his company, and more importantly, its people, were protected. In the end, Ethan didn't just restore a company, he restored his own sense of self-worth, showing that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, is always the best course of action. The real measure of success is how we treat others and how we face adversity, whether we succumb to it or rise above it. In real life, we often find ourselves in situations where doing the right thing isn't the easiest option. Whether it's standing up for a colleague, confronting a loved one about their wrongdoings, or even calling out corruption at work, choosing integrity over convenience can be daunting. However, like Ethan, we must remember that our actions define us, and by making the tough choices, we not only protect what matters most, but also build a legacy of honor and trust. Ethical leadership, transparency, and fairness should always be our guiding principles in both personal and professional settings.